Messages we got today. Tommy, how do I adjust my shocks? Tommy, what is the reason for the slope? What is the difference between high speed and low speed compression? Why does my car feel unstable? Why do I feel like I'm losing control hitting bumps? Let's see, shocks. Oh man, shocks. It's one of the questions I get asked literally on a daily basis. So today we're going to be diving into it, and I'm going to let you know exactly everything that you need to know when it comes to these new adjustable shocks in iRacing. What's up everybody, Thomas Bannon here. Thank you very much as always for joining me, and like I said, we're going to be diving into a fairly complex subject when it comes to setups and tuning on the asphalt oval cars, specifically the NASCAR series cars. So you've got the NASCAR Truck, the Xfinity, and you've got the NextGen. Now, one thing to note is that each level of those cars, there is a little bit different adjustability when it comes to the shocks. So for example, on the NextGen Cup Car, you have 6-way adjustable shocks, where the Xfinity you have 5-way, and then the trucks you have 4-way. Now keep this in mind, they are the exact same shocks and they do the same thing. It's just you are losing one level of adjustability, and that level of adjustability has to do with the specific high speed compression and high speed rebound. Now I'll get into why this doesn't really make that big of a difference for the vast majority of the races that you're going to run, and I'll tell you exactly what these things do, and I'll give you some examples of what they do as well, so that way you know how to adjust these things and what to do with them when you get on specific types of tracks. So let's head over to the garage and actually take a look at what we've got going on with these shocks. Alright, so we've got the garage up, and I'm using the NextGen Cup Car because they've got all 6 adjustments on it. And so if you can understand all 6 adjustments, then it makes it very easy to understand the 5-way and 4-way adjustable when you get to the Xfinity and the truck. So the first thing that you need to understand is the differences between low speed and high speed, right? When we talk about compression and rebound. Now, those of you who have been working on these cars for a while, when I talk about these cars, I mean the NASCAR series cars, you know that we used to have just 2-way adjustable shocks. Now, these 2-way adjustable shocks were essentially just low speed adjustments. Low speed is the transient movements of the car. These are the natural movements of a race car. So this would be when you're rolling into the accelerator, when you're rolling out of the accelerator and applying the brake, when you're steering the car, right, turning it into the corner and the suspension is setting, okay? These are all low speed movements. Now, it doesn't matter if you're doing NASCAR, right, Formula One or wing sprint cars. All race cars have essentially some form of low speed setting on their shocks, because like I said, that is the transient racing movements that are the ones that we really are trying to control. Now, these are also the big handling adjustments. So this is what you really need to understand. If you have a car, for example, that let's say it's tight on corner exit, one of the things that you would do is you would increase the right rear compression, okay, and that would help loosen it up, okay? You would do the low speed compression because we're looking for a transient movement. So anytime you think about fixing a handling issue in terms of loose, tight, you know, that type of thing, you're really looking at the low speed adjustments. Now, high speed adjustments, these are for those non-transient movements. So this would be for bumps, ruts, you know, hitting another car, right? Any type of aggressive or unforeseen movement, right? Maybe, for example, a slamming on the brakes, okay? Now, we don't really need to set up our car to slam on the brakes, but I'm just giving you guys an example of what the high speed stuff will do. Now, once again, high speed compression and rebound, it's the same concept as low speed. It's just looking to control the higher speed movements like we talked about with bumps, curb strikes, and things like that. Now, the reason why high speed is important is because certain tracks, right, take Dover, for example, the track that we're at, can have bumps, and really fine tuning and dialing in the high speed can have a huge effect on the overall comfort of the car. And this is something really important to note when it comes to shocks. You're not going to fix a completely junked handling car with your shocks. You're not. But what you can do is you can squeeze a lot of time in terms of speed out of your setup with the shocks if you can properly adjust them. You see, when it comes to a race car, for example, one of the examples that I always use is the fact that on a race car, you have tons of components. All right, just looking at the suspension, there's tons of components on the race car, right? Whether you got anti-roll bars, springs, shocks, right, all kinds of stuff. Yet only one of those components has a specialist, and that's the shocks, because they are that important when it comes to the comfort of the car. So when you are looking at really trying to make this thing drivable and feel good, especially in those situations where we're talking about rough tracks, right? Like those huge bumps that we have at Iowa, or the big transitions coming out of the corners at like a Bristol or a Dover. This is where the high speed compression and rebound really come into play. Now, probably the most confusing aspect of these new shocks for everybody is the high speed compression and rebound slopes. Now, what you need to understand about the slope is the slope is essentially talking about the slope of the curve for the shocks, right? When we talk about a shock dyno curve, we're talking about the slope of it. The slope settings is what actually controls it. Okay, now in real life, this can be done with different, pistons and valves and all types of stuff. They have blow off valves, all kinds of different things. But in iRacing, we just have a slope adjustment. Now, what this is going to do is this is really going to allow you to control the platform of the car while it's handling these bumps. Now, one thing that iRacing has done here when it comes to their explanations is the way that they have worded it has kind of made it confusing for people who don't fully understand what's going on with the shocks. So if you look at this, it'll say the slope of the high-speed compression dampening curve is used in conjunction with the high-speed dampening level to adjust the dampening curve shapes. Okay, so this is when we talk about going from something like a linear shock to something like a digressive shock. There's also a progressive shock, but we don't have those in iRacing. We just have a linear or digressive. It'll say low slope combined with high level produces very digressive curves that control the aero platform and suit large curb strikes. High slope and low level produces linear curves that typically suit bumpier tracks. Now, this is where it gets confusing. See, when iRacing says low slope combined with high level, most people think, oh, low slope. That means I want to decrease the number. That's not what they're talking about, unfortunately. They're talking about a lower slope in terms of the slope coming up and then leveling off. That would be a lower slope. A higher slope would be more of a linear curve. I've tested this stuff and looked at it all in Motec, and the higher the number, the more digressive the shock, meaning the lower the slope, okay? The lower the number, the more linear the shock, or the higher the slope, okay? So this can get really confusing for that very reason. So what does this actually look like when we start adjusting all these different things? Well, what I did is I went out and I did just a couple of quick runs here at Dover. And I set the shocks to all fives, which is the middle of the road. When we look at these shock adjustments, we have 1 to 10 on the adjustment. So I set everything to 5. All right, went out and turned a couple laps. And then what I did is I came in and then I just adjusted the slopes. So I cranked the slopes up to 10 and then I turned them all the way down to 1, both compression and rebound. And the results are pretty dramatic. Now, when we have the slopes set at 5, one of the things is that the car has a decent platform in terms of the control, but it still has enough in terms of the reaction, right? The curve to handle big bumps. Dover is a unique track. It's one of the best in terms of testing this because you've got the big transitions going in and out of the corners, and then you also have some bumps throughout the track that are rather small, but they're still there that you can feel them, and so it gives you a good wide array of types of things to deal with when it comes to the shocks. So when the slopes were set to 5, with everything else, the low speed and high speed set to 5, the car was pretty average in terms of how it handled the bumps and how it was doing on the track. Now, when we cranked those settings up to 10, the car was really locked down to the track. Now, one thing that you'll notice is that there was very little travel within the suspension. When you hit a bump, the car basically just boom, and that was pretty much it. Now, although the platform was much more controlled, one of the things that was happening is every time you would come over that transition into the corner, especially into turn 3, the car was literally slamming down onto the ground because the suspension was not absorbing it. It was essentially almost locked in place, and then the car would come up over it and just bang down off the ground, and you would literally feel it in the steering because it was so violent. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, we had all the slopes turned to 1, and this was an absolute nightmare. This thing was bouncing all over the place. The car was not in control. Every time you hit a bump, it would bounce, and then it would keep bouncing like it was a 1969 deuce and a quarter with with worn out shocks and springs on it. It just wouldn't stop, dude. It just kept going and going and going. Now, you might be wondering, well, Tommy, why would I ever want to put the slope down at 1 then if it's like that? Well, here's the thing. In terms of turning it to 1, you probably won't do that very often, if at all. But this is where the high speed adjustments go along with the slopes. You see, if I wanted to have that slope be a lot more linear, meaning that as it hits the bump, the force increases along with the speed, right? We get that 45-degree angle from the lower right or the lower left to the top right. We would want to adjust the high speed compression to help absorb that. This is where iRacing, when they talk about it in the garage, where they say a low level with a high slope can provide a much more linear shock, which suits bumpier tracks. And what you want to do is you want to look for that combination to help accommodate those bumps while maintaining control of the car. High-speed adjustments combined with the slope is where you'll really maximize the best with these adjustments, but they are very fine-tuned and they can be very hard for people to figure out if they don't have a lot of experience when it comes to adjusting the shocks. Now, if we look at the other end of the spectrum, let's say we have a smooth track. Well, then what would we want to do with our high-speed adjustments, and what would we want to do with our slope? Well, this is where we look at increasing the number in terms of the slope in the garage, right? Which does what? It flattens out, gives us a much more digressive curve. This controls the platform. And then we would just look at making very small adjustments on the high speed and low speed. And really, you probably wouldn't even need to make those if it was a really smooth track, say something like Las Vegas, right? Which is a smooth track, or even a Kansas, that another very smooth track where there's just not a lot of bumps. Now, really quick, if we look at what the Xfinity and the truck have, the Xfinity car has the high speed compression, but it is missing the high speed rebound, where the truck is missing both the high speed compression and the high speed rebound. And from everything that I can see in my testing and looking at the data in Motec, from my best guesses, what I'm thinking is that iRacing basically just has those set at 5. You just can't adjust them. They're not available in the garage. And so it's basically set at 5, which is just a middle of the road adjustment. Now, for those of you who are wondering, well, hey, how do I actually adjust these shocks? Well, we're going to talk about that right now, because that's the part that most people don't understand, even with me explaining all of this. So the first thing that you want to do when you are building a setup, or maybe you're adjusting on a setup or whatever it is, right? The first thing that you want to do is you want to just leave the shocks alone. Okay, the shock should be the last thing that you look to adjust. Shocks are going to be that last 15-20% of your setup. So when I build a setup, whether it's a free setup, a custom setup, or something for the insider program, I set all of my shocks to 5, right? Or whatever the middle is. Okay, now we're talking specifically right now about the truck, the Xfinity, and the NextGen Cup Car. Okay, so I will set them to 5. I go out and I build my setup, All right, I get everything else dialed in. Okay, my springs, my anti-roll bar, okay, my toe in, my caster, my camber. I get all of that stuff dialed in. Cross weight, ballast, you name it. Okay, I get all of that done. Once I have that feeling good, then I adjust my shocks. Now, the order that you want to adjust your shocks is this. So first you want to make your low speed adjustments. This is both low speed compression and low speed rebound. Once you have those set, then what you can do is going to depend on the track type that you're at. Now, if you are on a very smooth track, what you can do is leave the high speed adjustments alone and just adjust the slopes. For really smooth tracks, you would want to increase the number on the slope. All right, so that would be a higher number. Okay, so keep that in mind. Remember, it's the way that iRacing says it, it's reversed. So a higher number on the slope gives you a lower slope. All right, so you would want to increase the slope number. All right, and that'll give you a much more controlled aerodynamic platform, which is obviously critical for these cars. Now, what do you do if you're at a bumpier track? Well, at a bumpier track, what I will do is I will actually adjust my high speed compression and high speed rebound first, get that dialed in, and then I will look to match the slope with that. Now, there will be times on bumpy tracks where I will actually adjust the slope first and then look to fine tune with the high speed compression or high speed rebound. The thing that you need to understand about this the most is that there's no set in stone right or wrong way to adjust these high speed adjustments. Whether you do the slope first or the actual high speed compression and rebound is really up to you and what you are most comfortable with. For me, the reason why I will look at the high speed compression and rebound adjustments first before the slope adjustments on a really bumpy track is because I'm looking to get the control and the reaction taken care of in terms of how that shock is going to absorb those bumps before I look at controlling the platform. This is one of those things that you need to understand, that you don't have to have everything the same, right? So you don't have to have, if you have the left front at 6 on the rebound slope, you don't have to have the right front. All right, keep in mind, we're turning left most of the time, and those cars are going to go through those corners differently, and they're going to feel a part of the track differently depending on where they're at. Take Dover, for example. When these cars are coming up out of the corner, the lower you are on the track, the left side is going to have a much different reaction than the right side because of the angle of the transition coming up out of the corner. So always keep that in mind when you are looking at adjusting your shocks, that you want to think about it in terms of one corner at a time, but also remember that everything affects everything else, especially when it comes to the shocks. Now, lastly, if you're watching this and you're just like, Tommy, dude, I've got smoke coming out my ears, this is way too much for me to know. I don't think I'm gonna grasp this. Or maybe you are just like, dude, I don't want to have to do all that, it's just going to take too much time. Then there's a really simple solution that I can give you right now. So what the simple solution is this: leave the high speed adjustments, both high speed compression, high speed rebound, and the high speed slopes, leave them at 5 and only adjust your low speed, which is going to actually adjust the handling characteristics of the car the most. Doing this will provide you a good handling race car that, yes, might not handle all of the bumps the best, but for the most part, it'll still get you 90-95% of the way there to where you're still going to have a very good, very fast race car. And then if you want to take it one step further, you can leave the high speed compression and high speed rebounds alone and just adjust those slopes, so that way it just controls the platform of the car, giving you something that's just a little bit more comfortable. And the easiest way to do that is just remember that if it's a smooth track, you want a higher number on the slopes. If it's a bumpier track, you want a little bit lower number. And remember, 1 or 2 clicks does a lot. Don't just max these out. The days of, the two-way shocks where we just turned everything to like 32, those are gone. These new shocks definitely make a difference. You can feel the difference in the adjustments, and you don't want to just go crazy with them because, like I said, if you go to the extremes, especially when you don't need to, it can make the car feel really, really bad in those situations where you're hitting a bump or a transition or anything like that. So, you guys, that's pretty much everything that you need to know about these shocks. Now, keep in mind, yes, there is a lot more that I could have gone into in terms of specific adjustments for specific situations and things like that, but I didn't want this video to be an hour and a half long. I really hope this helped you some because, like I said, I get asked a ton about these shocks ever since they came out this last season, and it's been one of the things that I've been really trying to dial in and figure out a simple and easy solution for those of you out there that don't use Motec like I do or some other type of telemetry, because really that's where these shocks are now. All right, I adjust these shocks, yes, by feel, but mostly by telemetry, because when we look at these cars now, right? We always say we want these things to be realistic. We want them to be like real life, right? We want it to be as close as we possibly can get it to the real world. Well, the thing about that is understand NASCAR teams have dozens and dozens of engineers working on these cars. The days of suitcase Jake Elder sitting on a spring and going, this one feels good, stick it in the right front, those days are gone, right? Like these are rocket scientists that are basically working on these cars now. And in order to get that and turn it into a simulation and then also have it set up in a way to where the average person who is not a shock engineer can come in here and tune these things is a very fine line. And I think what we have right now is a really good mesh of those two sides, done by iRacing. It's complex enough for people like me who just love to geek out on this stuff, right? Ever since I started racing in the real world, 20, 30 years, however long it was, 25 years ago. I mean, I've always loved the setup stuff. I've always loved tweaking and tinkering and stuff like that, shock dynos and everything. So for me, I love it. Right, and I have no problem spending hours looking at telemetry and fine tuning and doing all that stuff and learning all that stuff so I can pass it on to you. But most of you guys don't want to do that, right? This is, you're not like me. This isn't your job. And so you don't want to have to do that. And because of that, I wanted to give you something, like I said, that kind of gives you a good outline that you can use and go out and still be fast. And that's the key. We all want to have competitive racing, be out there side by side and having a good time, because that's why all of us started doing this. None of us started doing this to have a headache. We all started doing it to have fun. And that's hopefully what this will help you with, is it'll allow you to get those adjustments, understand what you're doing, and provide you with a better handling race car so you can go out and compete more and hopefully do it at the highest level. So that'll do it, you guys. Thank you very much as always for joining me. Now do me a favor really quick, if you like this, you know what to do. Hit the like button. I don't care how you do it, but do that for me. Also share this, please. Share it with groups, discords, whatever. If you know other people who race these cars and have been trying to figure out these shocks and they don't want to dive into the Alice in Wonderland size rabbit hole that is telemetry, share this video, because hopefully this will help clarify things for them. I'm also going to be putting together a simple shock guide for these cars so people will actually have something that they can adjust and they don't need telemetry. They can do it simply on the track type and how the car feels. That will be coming up not until 2022. I'm getting ready to leave to Mexico here in a couple of weeks, and I got a ton of stuff that I got to do before we go, but that will be coming early 2022, and it'll be free and available on the free membership site. So share this stuff, get it out there to a lot of people. And then, like I said, if you have not already joined the SSR community, make sure you do that, because it is, in my opinion, the best sim racing community out there. Whether you like, dirt racing, asphalt oval racing, I'm even starting to do more road racing now. That's right. I apparently don't have enough on my plate, so I'm going to start doing do more road racing now. I've been doing that kind of behind the scenes. I haven't really been sharing that much, but it will be coming. And it's a great community. We're thousands of people in there now, thousands of people, and it's just an awesome place to meet other like-minded sim racers. It's respectful. You can get your questions answered, and you can hop into voice channels and just race with people and have a good time. I race with my friends. I mean, they're friends now, and I race with them all the time, and it's what makes this so much fun. But that'll do it, you guys. Thank you very much as always, and until next time, good luck, good racing, take care.